Hi, welcome back to EducateTube.com. My name is Sipsky, your host. Today we'll be doing comparison between Sony a6500 versus Sony a7R II. I'm going to do a comparison for video as well as the photo. There will be an attachment of the clip at the end comparing the photos and just showing the video as well. So, just me summary quickly, which one would I pick? If I'm on a tight budget and if I had to choose one camera, I would go for the Sony a6500. Okay, this camera pretty much beats, in terms of price and performance, beats Sony a7S II, which I sold off already, as well as Sony a7R II. Now, of course, Sony a7R II, its main high feature is its ability to have high megapixel, which is 42 megapixel, very high resolution. And does it make a difference? Oh yes. I have to tell you right now, when I zoom in the picture, the Sony a6500, you can zoom in about 6 times before you see any pixelation, whereas the Sony a7R II, when you have to zoom in 9 times in order to see the pixelation. So it's about 50% better in terms of if you want to enlarge this photo, 50% better. At the beginning I'm thinking, what's 50%, right? But it's a big difference. Just imagine this. If you have, so I did this comparison. It's a bit subjective, but because I'm comparing to 3 cameras, it becomes quite objective. Although, it's based on my vision, I'm saying, 1 meter away from the screen. So I have a 24-inch screen, and I'm sitting about 1 meter away, and I start to zoom in a picture at, for Sony a6500 and Sony a7R II, as well as Sony a7S II. And as I zoom in, I realize for Sony a7S II, at about 3 times, you start to see pixelation. For Sony a6500, when you zoom in at 6 times, you start to see pixelation. And then when you try Sony a7R II and you zoom in, you start seeing it after 9 times. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, imagine this: if you are looking at a picture and you're standing about 1 meter. Now, most people don't stand 1 meter from the picture unless they're like peeping at the picture itself, right? But let's say if you're really critical about being a perfectionist when you're taking photos, and you want to get every single detail to the T. Well, if you're standing about 1 meter from a 24-inch screen, was it 27? I think it's a 27-inch screen, right? Yeah, it's a 27-inch screen. Okay, and 1 meter, and you start zooming in. Okay, so for Sony a7S II, you zoom in at about 3 times, and you start to see this pixelation. You say, not acceptable. For the Sony a6500, you zoom in 6 times, and you start to see pixelation. You say, oh, that's not good. And then for the Sony a7R II, when you zoom in 9 times, then you start to see pixelation, and you say, okay. But what does that mean to us? Okay, it's like saying this. If you're taking a picture, right, and let's say it was 1 meter. Okay, the object is 1 meter. And basically, if you stand 1 meter away and you enlarge that object, that 1 meter object, on a 27-inch screen 3 times, okay, if you just enlarge it 3 times, then Sony a7S II is okay, no problem. So now we're 1 meter to 3 meter would still be okay. You won't see pixelation. Okay, for the Sony a6500, when you take a 1 meter object and you zoom in 6 times, so from 1 meter to 6 meter at about 1 meter away visual range, then again you won't see any difference as long as within 6 times zoom. So 1 meter to 6 meter, that's quite impressive, right, for Sony a6500. But if you want to enlarge a huge poster, okay, so a 1 meter object, you zooming it to like 9 meter, all right. So in other words, you're gonna enlarge it 9 times, and you're standing 1 meter away from that screen, 27-inch screen. Basically, you can't see any pixelation. That's how impressive this Sony a7R II is. And in fact, that's why I kept this camera. It's very expensive, of course, but I bought it secondhand, so it's not too bad. And when you do that, you go, wow, this is amazing. You're holding a technology where you can actually zoom in 9 times without losing any quality. So if I want to make a poster, I can literally make a building size poster standing about maybe 30 meters away, and it looks amazing, right? So a 42 megapixel camera, you want to enlarge a very big one, then this camera is it. and you know, I'm into like big posters and all that stuff. So now, if you are doing poster size, like I'm talking about, you know, those life size, okay, like human size. So for example, I take a picture of myself, the same size, 1:1 ratio, then 24 megapixel is okay. It's great. I mean, you cannot tell, right? Unless you stand like 1 meter away from it and looking in at every single fine detail, then yes. But normally we don't do that, right? We usually stand about 2-3 meters away, looking at 1:1 ratio size, life size. Now, for the Sony a7R2, if you're standing, you know, 1 meter away, you can enlarge it another 50% more, and you can't see it, you know, the pixelation. So this is the power of this Sony a7R2, 42 megapixel. That's very impressive. Okay, so if you worry about, you know, enlarging a photo to like more than life size, I'm talking about, you know, 9 times, and you're standing about maybe 10 meters away. Wow, like let's say you take a picture of yourself, but you want to enlarge it the size of a house, okay, and you're standing maybe about 20-30 meters away, Sony a7R2 is it. This is the camera to get, okay? But of course, most of us don't do that kind of posters, unless we are an artist, you know, want to show in a gallery or something like that. A huge photo, this camera is it. Of course, make sure you get a very good lens as well. I had a video about the 3 lens I recommend, prime lens, which has a very high perceived megapixel. The one here is attached is the Sony FE85mm f1.8. is definitely a very good lens. You can check the xomark.com to see its evaluation. Same thing with the Zeiss FE 55mm f1.8 as well. A very good high resolution, perceived resolution. Both of them above 40 megapixel perceived resolution. And then I have another one, the Sony FE 28mm f2, which is I'm filming right now on my Sony a5000. All right, so these 3 prime lenses I highly recommend. Now let's not talk too much. Let's have a look at the actual photo and why I'm impressed with the Sony a7R2 for photography. When you're into large prints, right? You've got big prints. This camera is it. Okay, that's why I kept both of this. Now, if I had no choice, if I'm really lacking the budget and I have to sell off one, I would have to go with it, take this away from myself and stick with this one, because this one overall for video and photography, this is the camera to go to. Okay, it's an APS-C camera. However, it's you know, when you look at the low light performance, you look at video performance and photography performance, this actually beats out, if you're looking at video and photo, right, beats out Sony a7S2 as well as Sony a7R2. For example, the Sony a7R2 does not have S-Log3, where this Sony a6500 has S-Log3. Okay, they both have S-Log2 for, you know, film grading. Another thing is Sony a6500 can do 1080p 120 frames per second, whereas a Sony a7R2 cannot. It can only do 720 120 frames per second. Of course, the advantage with the Sony a7s is that it has a mic jack built in, so you can listen to your audio. But you know, most of the time when I'm doing professional audio video and audio recording, I actually record on a separate mic. Okay, so here you can see here I actually record on a separate audio mic. I actually don't use the internal mic on the camera. I think that the quality is really bad. You know, even that slight, you know, you can't really hear the motor in these FE lens, but if you really listen carefully, there might be a slight motor sound. Like, but even that, I don't want to put it, you know, be in my video shoot. So that's why I would have a separate audio shoot. The good thing, of course, is that you record it on your the camera, and you then, when you're doing the video editing, you at least can time it so that you can replace that external audio into this video shoot. So that's what I recommend. If you're doing professional video shoot, you would actually record externally anyway, right? I think it's just sounds much better. I have a Zoom H5 when I'm doing audio recording. Okay. Anyway, enough said. Talk too much. I want to have to look at the photos, and I'm going to show you the Sony a7R2 filming the video on the full frame as well as super 35 mils. Okay, APS-C mode. Now, I would recommend you do that when you, especially when you have both the Sony a6500 and the Sony a7R2. Change it to the Super 35 mode, APS mode, because what you end up getting is the same capability for both cameras. So when I do a Super 35 APS mode on the Sony a7R2, then the performance is the same as the Sony a6500. In other words, the low noise at even at about 25,600 ISO, both camera is amazing. Okay, now of course not compare. You can't compare that to the Sony a7S2. The Sony a7S2 can do 51,200 ISO without any noise. Whereas these two cameras, I would think for myself anyway, acceptable range is 12,800 ISO for both of this camera. For the Sony a7R2, you have to set it to Super 35 mode, APS-C mode, and the Sony a6500 same. Well, it's an APS-C camera. So 12,800 ISO. Both this camera does an amazing job. The same. Okay. But the Sony a7S2 can do 2 stop more, so up to 51,200 ISO. So if you really want to go for 2 more stops, then go for the Sony a7S2 for video filming. But I think at 12,800 for most of us should be definitely adequate, because when you get that kind of low light performance, I would think that you might want to introduce a little bit of ambient light in the background anyway, unless of course it's a horror movie where there's no light whatsoever and you just want to depend on the camera itself. Then yeah, maybe Sony a7S2 would be it. But 12,800 ISO is not bad at all. Our vision can actually see about equivalent to about 3,200 ISO. So we have 2 more stops with these 2 cameras, right? And then we maybe at the back we can add a bit of ambient light to it. And even if you are doing a short film, horror movie, whatever that type of movie you have, having low ambient light, acceptable with these 2 cameras, definitely. All right, let's have a look at the comparison right now, the photo and the video. Okay, so here we have an image of a watch captured by Sony a6500 on the left and Sony a7R2 on the right. The Sony a6500 is using a Zeiss 55mm f1.8 lens, and the Sony a7R2 is using Sony 85mm f1.8. They're both FE lens, full frame. Both are very good lens. You can check DxOMark.com. They're pretty much a high resolution type of a lens, capturing at 40 megapixel perceived resolution. Okay, so you can see here the image is showing in terms of zooming in about the same size, although I would say a7R2 is a little bit zoom in, but you see the quality, no pixelation, very good image. Now watch this. I'm gonna zoom in with the 85mm on this image, and you can see the image capture 50% zoom in, and still the Sony a7R2 show very beautiful or very detailed sharpness. There's no pixelation, so you can see the advantage of Sony a7R2 over Sony a6500 in terms of photo. So what does that mean? Well, I mentioned before about zooming in 6 times with Sony a6500, and with Sony a7R2 zooming in 9 times. So you can see here, even if you do the comparison, if let's say Sony a6500 is already zooming 6 times, and you want to zoom even further, and you can see on the Sony a7R2 another 3 more times or 9 times, you can see there is no quality loss in terms of detail, no pixelation and all that. Sharpness is amazing, right? So that's the advantage that Sony a7R have over Sony a6500. This is why I kept Sony a7R2 camera. Of course, we're talking about same quality type of lens. Sony a7R2 is amazing. Okay, now let's compare the video, and you can tell me if you can see the difference, and I can tell you there is no difference if we set Sony a7R2 at super 35 mils. This is 12,800 ISO, 16,000 ISO, 20,000 ISO. Remember, this is all full frame. I haven't set it to super 35. Okay. 25,600 ISO. So that's as far as it can go. It's weird. So 25,600 ISO for the video. Okay, so now I'm filming at super 35 APS-C mode. This is 12,800 ISO, 16,000, 20,000 ISO, 25,600 ISO. Okay, so this is 12,800. Okay, have a look. And this is as far as can go, 25,600. And I think it looks pretty good on the camera, but I'll try to see this on the big screen, see what happens. So have a look, compare this a6500 to the Sony a7S II. I think 25,600 ISO on a video is, I think, more than adequate.